Hello ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my Doctor Who Season 16 ranking. Now, this is the ranking of the entire Key to Time saga, or Season 16, as it's also known as, just like how Trial of a Time Lord is Doctor Who Trial of a Time Lord, the Trial of a Time Lord, aka Season 23. So, without further ado, what's the stories in the Key to Time, Season 16? Well, they are the Ribos Operation, the Pirate Planet, the Stones of Blood, the Androids of Tara, the Power of Kroll, and the Armageddon Factor. And I did that without having to look on the DVDs or the case. That's why I hiccuped. So that's the Key to Time stories. Now, Season 16 has been a brilliant season, with every story from Ribos Operation to the Androids of Tara getting better and better as we went along. However, we hit a massive dud once again with the Power of Kroll, and then we got back on track slightly with the Armageddon Factor. If you saw my review of that story, we had a disappointing climax to the overall season. So overall, Season 16 has been great, but disappointing end to the story arc. That is, disappointing end to the story arc, and a massive dud the story before the story that climax takes place. So, time to rank the episodes then. But how do the stories stand compare next to each other? Well, it's time to rank them. As I mentioned, the first 4 stories are basically better and better as we go along, but where do the other 2 episodes come in compared to that? Pretty simple, really, as I will show in a few minutes. So let's start off with number 6. Number 6 is the story that let the season down massively. It's the Planet of Evil of Season 16, except this time round, I think a lot more people would agree with me on saying it's the weakest story of the season. I mean, some people might say maybe the first story. Some people might decide the last story. Some people might choose something else. But for me, this is the weakest story of Season 16 and one of the weakest stories of the Tom Baker era. And that is the Power of Kroll. More like the power of cunt, am I right? The Power of Kroll is boring, it's insensitive, a little bit racist towards religious culture, it's very political. Underneath the surface. On the surface, not so much, but underneath, it's very political. And unlike examples I gave in that the review of that story of both classic and modern Who stories, it doesn't do them as well. More examples: the Green Death. That was a very obviously political story, but it handled that political stuff brilliantly. This story does not. And on top of that, dull and uninteresting. And the fact that they had to film on location in a very difficult spot, location filming, makes me wonder why they bothered to do this story in the first place. If they knew it was going to be this difficult, why couldn't they make up an excuse of saying, "Oh, it's budget problems. Can we get another story in?" Maybe it's because it was probably cheap location filming, and they could film quite a lot of it in sets. That's probably why they decided to do it. But on the whole, it's just not that great. The Kroll monster itself actually isn't that bad of a design, and the effects aren't that terrible. But the story lets it down way too much. The history and the backstory about Kroll and the world building is probably the best stuff about the story, followed by great performances from our main leads. And Philip Maddock, whilst in his weakest role to date, still has one last great performance before he leaves the show. Of course, he would be back in Big Finish for at least once in possibly my favourite Big Finish audio at the moment, an audio called Master, where he plays a character in that, a policeman, inspector sort of, and he's really good in that story. I don't know if he's been in any others, but he's certainly really good in that audio. But yeah, whilst his character in Power of Kroll isn't that great and he doesn't give his best performance, probably his weakest performance, it's still good. It's still Philip Maddock. So I'm not going to bash him too much. But yeah, Power of Kroll is just not that great. And yeah, and then I don't really care about the argument between the humans and the Swampies. It's not really worth it. So yeah, Power of Kroll. Don't care. Not really. I thought I was going to rant about it more in the review than I actually did. So yeah, even though it's the review / rant, it's not. And I did rant about it quite earlier on. I didn't rant about it as much as I thought I was going to. Oh well. Still gave it a negative review, so job's done. And the bitch is dead. Referenced. If anybody got that reference, give yourselves a round of applause. It's not a Doctor Who reference, but if anyone got it, well done. Anyway, so number 5. Number 5 is the first of the good stories in this ranking. All of the other stories are good. I'm trying to do a 12th Doctor impression. Good, as opposed to shit, like the last, which was the Power of Kroll. So it pains me to say this, that number 5 is actually a pretty fun story in places. I mean, there isn't much of a story here, but it's fucking more enjoyable than Power of Kroll. The Ribos Operation. Yeah, the Ribos Operation. There isn't a huge amount going for this one, but it's fun. It's fun. It's enjoyable. It's got good characters. It's easy to get into. It's a nice, easy way to start off what is looking like to be a difficult task for the Doctor, Romana, and K9. And it's a nice way to ease them into the task before coming to the more difficult stuff later on. Yeah, and the Doctor said it'd be a piece of cake afterwards in the Pirate Planet. After finding the first segment, everything else is going to be a piece of cake. Ha! As if. Look at Story 6 to be, for example. But Ribos Operation is still really fun and entertaining. And unlike other stories later down the line, it doesn't let its overall story plot get in the way of the search for the key to time, because they've just started searching, so it's very much at the front of their mind, but they just interfere at the same time as well, as opposed to other stories where it starts to move, finding this segment moves towards the back of the mind in some of them as they try and sort out the situation in those stories. Looking at you, Pirate Planet, Stone to Blood, and Power of Kroll, and sort of Armageddon Factor, but not as much because it is pretty forefronted as well due to being the last story. And Andrews of Tara, they find it and then it disappears. Then they have to deal with the situation again. Ribos Operation it feels like what the whole season should have been, but with the other stories, of course, being better and having more to them. With the trying to find the key to time, but at the same time getting muddled up with the situation, as opposed to key to time moving towards the back of the mind to sort the situation out for the most parts. But that being said, the Ribos Operation isn't a huge amount of story there. There isn't a huge amount of plot, but it's fun, it's enjoyable, has some good moments, some great characters, including that merchant guy who sounds like he's from Somerset, and his Somerset / Irish, can really tell properly, accent guy, accomplice, and this fun side character called Binro. He was nice in a couple of scenes. It's a shame he died for nothing. But yeah, Ribos Operation, good start, and it's a good way to ease the characters into the season. Number 4 is a good way for the season to end off, but it's not an amazing finale. The Armageddon Factor. Yeah, it's just this story was a little bit too long. Yet again, sometimes 6-parters seem to be dragging out a bit more. Maybe it's the fact that we've got more 4-parters now and we're more used to those, I suppose. But I don't know. Seeds of Doom, Genesis of the Daleks, and Tanto Wang Shang weren't that bad at 6 parts, but Invasion of Time and Armageddon Factor, despite trying to split them up into sort of 4 and 2 parts merged, they don't quite hit the same levels. But on the whole, Armageddon Factor is still a really good finale. It's got a really good plot. The key to time is at the forefront of the main characters' minds, but at the same time, they're still interfering with the messing around with this situation. So again, like Ribos Operation, this is something that they could have done throughout the season instead of it moving to the back of the mind. And a pretty great villain in the form of the Shadow, even though I think the Black Guardian would have been even better as a season finale villain. But the Shadow has great stuff, and we've got lots of great characters and performances throughout the story to keep the story keeping going, and it keeps changing, and that keeps the story flow moving and interesting. It doesn't get boring like Power of Kroll, but there is some interesting duller stuff earlier on, but as it keeps going, it gets more and more interesting and more enjoyable, so stick with it. And Drax is a brilliant and funny character, so it's worth watching the first 4 and a bit episodes before you get to see him for the first time during part 5, so that's cool. And the Black Guardian makes his first appearance in this story, like the White Guardian did in Ribos. Although, like I said, I think he really should have been the villain of the whole story, as the main villain of the story, as opposed to making an appearance at the end. And we have to wait till season 20 till we see him again. And the White Guardian, and that one in that time in a smaller role as well. And the climax, as I mentioned, disappointing, very disappointing for the season, more for the story. And the whole storyline, the story arc, is basically just swept aside. They just said, "Oh, it's finished now." There, and Black Guardian, let's just put you over there to wait till we bring you back out again. Yeah, it just felt that they wanted to finish it up and then just send the keys back out without them having to go back to the White Guardian, just so that it could have a Black Guardian appearance. Again, another benefit of having the Black Guardian as the main villain is that when the White Guardian could show up to try and use the key to time, but the Black Guardian comes along, so the Doctor is forced to then separate the keys themselves, so that neither of them would get their hands on it, and then both of them would be annoyed, so the Doctor, Romana, and K9 make a break for it. And then that inspires them to put the randomizer on, so that they can't be tracked by either Guardian. So that would have been a great climax. But what we got was okay. It was anticlimactic. I can't sugarcoat it. It was anticlimactic. Great performances, but anticlimactic. Oh well. It's not the worst finale. Number 3. Number 3 is a popular one in the fan community. And to be honest, this one was originally my 5th least favourite story of the season. Then it shot up to about 3rd, and then to 2nd. And then it went back down to 3rd again when I saw another story, and that one shot up. This story is Douglas Adams' first Doctor Who script, The Pirate Planet. Yeah, and out of the 3, it's my least favourite personally. I know a lot of people would prefer this to Shada somehow, but personally, I don't think this is as strong as Shada, and certainly not as good as City of Death. But it's still a good story, and Douglas Adams does a great job with his first story, and lots of great humour, working magnificently with the sci-fi, and I think Douglas Adams is the one writer who gets it pitch perfect. Both comedy with sci-fi, probably down to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy mostly. Although I think that came a little bit just afterwards. And certainly with The Pirate Planet, he is able to merge both genres brilliantly, as I mentioned. And the characters are great, they're fun, there's a really good plot, pretty fun effects, some cheesy, out-of-date ones, but still pretty fun. And the whole story is quite fun. I think they are a bit focused more on finding the second segment of the key to time earlier on, but then later on they just forget about it for a bit. But still slightly dedicated to finding it. And yeah, it's a fun story, enjoyable, and has quite a lot of fun for it. But personally, I just prefer 2 other stories in this season, and I also prefer Douglas Adams' 2 other stories he wrote for the show. But Pirate Planet was certainly a great first script for him. Number 2. Number 2 is a story by another writer who I think was better in this season than in the following 2 seasons when he came back to write scripts, apart from his City of Death contributions, because City of Death is the best. And I think he gets the sci-fi, horror, and comedy genres pretty much down really well, especially sci-fi and gothic horror. I guess it's handled brilliantly in this story, and that is The Stones of Blood. Now, this is the story where the key to time is as far back in the Doctor, Romana, and K9's minds as it can possibly go, because this story doesn't really focus on them trying to find it as much, early or later on. They just find it. But at the same time, it's a really good story. It's really fun, really enjoyable. We've got some great supporting characters. Can Amelia Rutford have her own Big Finish spin-off, please, Big Finish? And also, the merge of the sci-fi element is handled beautifully with the gels really well with the gothic horror. The story does go downhill when these justice machines get introduced, especially with Part 4 basically being dedicated to a boring trial. Seriously, this trial didn't have to be the length of nearly the entire episode, minus scenes with Rutford and K9. It could have been cut down. It could have been lost altogether, even. The only reason it's here is so that the justice machines can carry out justice on the villain, Cecilia of Diplos, a.k.a. Vivian Faye, a.k.a. the Celtic goddess. I can't remember the name that she took. But that's the only reason they're even in the story, so they can pass judgment and punish her at the very end. Yay. But besides those problems, the story is still a really good and entertaining gothic horror sci-fi adventure. It's just a shame Part 4 isn't as interesting with the boring trial stuff. Probably the weakest trial scenes in the show, and there is quite a few. Okay, so Stones of Blood. It was still a really good story though. Number one, I just found having a ball of a time with. Just so fun, so entertaining, and just outright good. Surprisingly, this had been my favourite story when I first watched the season. Then rewatching it went down to second and third after rewatching Pirate Planet recently. And Stones of Blood took the first place spot. And then after rewatching this story after the rewatch of Pirate Planet, of course, it shot back up to number 1. And number 1 is, of course, The Androids of Tara. This story is just a ball of fun. Yeah, there is some slow, dull bits, maybe more later on than earlier on. It seems David Fisher's stories, the first half is the stronger half, and the second half lets it down a little bit, especially the last episode. But this time round, not as bad as the Stones of Blood. I think this story has a great script. It has great characters, with Peter Jeffrey basically giving himself a near Oscar-winning performance as the villain, Grendel. We've got some great supporting allies, including the Prince, later King. Mary Tam gets to play 4 characters: Romana, Princess, not Astra, Strella, and an android of those respective characters. So 2 androids, basically, one of Strella and one of Romana. And the whole android stuff works really well into the scripts, but they don't take over the story. And the location filming is possibly the best of the series. It is the best of the series. Leeds Castle in Kent. I even got a leaflet when I went to the Epping Ongar Railway yesterday. Here we go. There's a leaflet for it. Leeds Castle, 900 years. Look at that spectacular picture. And if you've seen the story, doesn't that remind you of the story just 40 years later? And yeah, it's just, I really want to go to this castle. Actually, I really want to go here, but unfortunately, prices are high. If only if it was English Heritage or National Trust. I got it in for free, being a member. But anyway, the location filming is spectacular. and it's just really good. The only letdown is that the sword fight at the end is one of the weaker, if not the weakest, of the sword fights in the show. There were sword/fencing fights that other elsewhere in the show, like Sea Devils, King's Demons, and the Christmas Invasion, would all be better than this one. I don't think there was one in Mask of Mandragora. I don't remember it. There might have been. I don't remember it though, so I can't comment. Jack McCulloch, if you're watching, could you let me know if there was? Because you like that story more than me, so you probably remember it better. If not, don't worry. Just say you don't remember. Anyway, but Androids of Tara is still a great story and tons of fun, ton of entertainment. Some slight issues with it, but on the whole, definitely the best story of the Graham Williams era until next season, where there's going to be an even better one. But other than that, then it's this one is easily the best story of the Graham Williams era. Some people may disagree with that, but for me, this one is the second best story of Graham Williams' era, second only to City of Death. And yeah, and that is an achievement. So that's it from me. Thank you for watching. I will just just remind you of the ranking. Number 6 is the Power of Kroll, aka the Power of Cunt. Number 5 is the Ribos Operation. Number 4 is the Armageddon Factor. Number 3 is the Pirate Planet. Number 2 is the Stones of Blood. And number 1 is the Androids of Tara. So that's it from me. Thank you for watching. Now, as I mentioned at the end of my Armageddon Factor review, the next season is likely to be my least favourite of the entire season. It's of the entire show, season 17. It's either that or season 24. Because from before rewatching these stories, season 17 is just the least number of good stories. There's 2 silver linings, and one of them wasn't even broadcast. And the rest are meh or worse by the looks of it. However, things may improve for the rewatch. Season 24 has a similar situation, but that one's got 4 stories as opposed to the 5 plus the unbroadcast one in the next season. So yeah, that's season 17 might be my least favourite season of the show. It's that or 24 or 35, which is series 9, but I don't think so. That one's definitely the weakest new series, and it is at the bottom, towards the bottom, alongside season 11 as well, and season 15, and maybe 23, and maybe 18 and 19 and 20, maybe 21. I'm not sure. In fact, the 80s. As much as I enjoy 80s stories, the seasons aren't quite as good. 22 and 25 and 26 are probably the exceptions. But we'll see. Anyway, but season 16, that is a season. And if I was to do the ranking of the seasons at this point, season 16 would go above season 4. So this is 6th place. Now, as much as I liked season 16, I think season 14 as a season was stronger. But I think season 16 is right behind it. It's a very strong season. I think if it had a better climax, it could have beaten season 14. But the climax was anticlimactic. So season 14 just overtakes it by a millimeter. Yeah, a millimeter's difference between seasons 14 and 16. And that's all due to a season arc climax not being anticlimactic. Whilst 14 has some really great stuff in it. Plus, season 14 doesn't have anything as bad as Power of Kroll. Then again, it doesn't have anything as... Actually, no, that's a lie. Dead the Assassin. I was going to say nothing as good as Androids of Tara, but that's a lie. That's better. Okay, so, yeah. So my season ranking, I'm not going to go through all 16 seasons, but basically, number 6 is season 16. And the top 5 are still the same. Yeah, so that's about it from me. Thank you for watching. Next time, season 17, starting with Destiny of the Daleks. And I'll see you guys then. Goodbye.
Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Nicholas Payne Retro YouTube channel,
where he plays a character who visits. That being said, it's Ribos Operation has fun. The the Armageddon Factor, and Drax is an amazing character. Well, so, anyways, that's late 78, early 70, early to late 79, fairly early 80. But with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he would get it spot on. So, it's from what I've heard. I have only seen the film. And yeah, definitely Pirate Planet, he uses quite a lot of, but still pretty decent in other places. It's just a shame that Part 4 just isn't as interesting with its fucking trial stuff. Hang on. I think it's saying it was the oldest castle? So that's it more. Or 36, 5, 30.